Okay, I think I do. So, like I said, ask me any questions you want. I'm just going to kind of go through a few things and just talk about all of the news that's happened today and just my thoughts on what's going on. So, um, first of all, we started out this morning with an announcement from the MLS to ATX people, which would be the shorthand for Anthony Precourt. He has announced an agreement with the city of Austin, which will allow them to develop a new stadium down there at McCalla Place. This is obviously a long time coming. They have been working on this, since, let's just say they've been working on it for a long time. And so they finally got it done. This is not quite the end of the road for them. The lease has been disclosed and put up on the Austin, Texas website. Additionally, I haven't had a copy. I haven't had a full chance to read it because obviously there's been a lot of stuff going on. I'm not expecting any announcement immediately from MLS, basically saying flying down to Austin and making an announcement. It sounds like they've got some I's to dot and T's to cross as well. So it's just it'll be probably a matter of time. I don't expect there's going to be any issues. I know people have thought that Precourt is just this short of incompetent. But they've been generally running through and being able to do what they need to do to get this agreement moving along. So there's a bunch of stuff that they still need to do. It hasn't gotten there yet. The most important things that I saw out of the announcement and reviewing the documents is that it's pretty clear that they are not going to have a stadium done, or they're not going to have a team until next year or until 2021. I know they're holding out hope of 2020. Nothing that I have been told leads me to believe that they're going to get a team down there before 2021. They still don't have a temporary stadium site. It doesn't seem like to make a whole lot of sense that they're going to play down there in a temporary site for a year, risk having mediocre crowds, mediocre enthusiasm, all that kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden they go to they have to open up a year later after having had a bad year and killed the momentum. That's essentially what I was told way back when I was told that they weren't going to have a team back in 2019, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to even try to rush it to 2020. You might as well just have it in 2021 and just kind of go from there and start fresh. So and that's what Precourt said as well. So I'm not expecting anybody to I'm not expecting them to come in 2020. It would be fairly shocking if they did, because they've already got two teams coming into play for next year. And why would you have three teams? That's going to result in potentially an expansion draft with three different teams all losing players. That's moving 15 players around potentially. And that's a lot. That's a lot of turnover. And then you also have the issue of you're going to have an odd team. So you're up to 27, which oddly enough, 27 is not a horrible number because if you do three divisions, if you add a central division, because I think it actually works out perfectly. You play each of your teams in your division twice. You play a team, each team in the other two divisions once, and I think you get to 34 if I'm not mistaken. Someone can check my math. So again, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. They should just come in 2021, and they can come in with St. Louis, who's probably going to be team 28. So that's what they should do. So hopefully that is what they do. So beyond that, there's not a whole lot else to say about Austin. I did get a note from Bill Alashar, who is the attorney down in Austin, who has sued the city council on one occasion or six. His quote to me is that he is reviewing the lease agreement, and they will come up with a decision on what they want to do after the new year. Obviously, this agreement with Austin was not released until today, which is obviously just a couple of days before Christmas, and a week and a half before New Year. So everyone's out on vacation. This isn't really the time where you're going to want to add one of those things. And besides, you're not going to get a whole lot of media coverage with everyone out of town. So Bill is likely not to do anything until after the new year. But this also agreement is signed and executed. Everything is a go for Austin. Dave Greeley, who's running PSV down there, I think, or something along those lines. He basically said they've hired contractors, they've hired an architect, they're probably starting the permitting process. So they are flat out ready to rock and roll. And so it's going to be one of those things where they're probably gonna have a team there in 2021, and that's been kind of their mantra throughout this process. And I don't see anything that would make that change. So everyone can wait for Precourt to have his team down there. So I think that's pretty much all there is on Austin. So let's move over to the Crew, which is obviously one of the not these issues aren't intertwined, but they are related. That's kind of like my favorite saying. It is kind of parallel paths. And so what we're doing right now what they're doing right now is finalizing the deal. It looks to me that everything has been finalized on the Columbus side now. The governor, John Kasich, is now he has signed off on the SB 51, which was the state state contribution to the Memorandum of Understanding, which is a bunch of legalese, which is basically a contract that the city, the state, the county, and MLS through Haslam Edwards, they all signed and said, we agree to do X, Y, and Z. Each one's got their thing that they have to do. And now all of the government officials have essentially done it at this point. Everyone has done what they are required to do. So at this point, it seems to me that MLS is basically at a point where they should get this over the line. The government has fulfilled their obligations to the best of their ability. If any of you read my story that I just dropped on you can search Soccer ESQ. It's under the title Finish Line. The only thing that the government has to do, which they can't do at this point, which was what was contemplated, is there is $30 million worth of money that the government is working in conjunction with Haslam and Edwards to put into the coffers for the development of the site, stadium, complex, whatever you want to call it. And that money they can't access that right now because they haven't put together the authority to create it. And that can't get done until after the new year because the city council is out of session right now, and they won't be back until 2019. And as many of you will note, the Memorandum of Understanding had a deadline of December 31st of 2018 to get the sale done. So it is impossible for that particular component to be done, and that had to have been known at the time. So MLS is not going to use that as an excuse to say, oh, well, you couldn't get the last $30 million over the line, so sorry, you're not going to have a team. So I don't expect that to be a problem. The people I've talked to don't expect that to be a problem. And frankly, it doesn't make any sense to try to hold up the deal based on that. So at this point, MLS is done, or everything is done that MLS needs done. And so they need to probably just get the sale done. And I have not confirmed this. I've been inquiring that MLS may have another Board of Governors meeting here shortly. It may not. It's not going to be the formal one. It may just be the expansion/relocation committee. It may just be by phone or conference call or something along those lines. But that is the last piece of the puzzle. I have not heard anything that at the previous Board of Governors meeting that they had basically ratified this yet. So I assume that some other step needs to be taken to get that done. And at that point, the Crew will have their team for the hopefully remainder of the existence of soccer and MLS, or until the planet is no longer a part of the universe. And so that hopefully will be done here. I don't have I have zero information on this, so do not no one quote me and say Mickey's reporting that the deal is going to be done. But my speculation is that we're going to get something done this week. Some announcement will come out this week. I don't know if Garber's going to fly out to Columbus to do some ribbon cutting, or if they'll do a press release. It's been tough to get information out of MLS these days on this issue, so hopefully they will be a little forthcoming in the next couple of days, especially since everything is done. And then what we'll hopefully see is some type of announcement this week that the team is saved. As far as I can tell, based on the crew folks that I've talked to, they still have not been able to find or they still have not been able to buy tickets to the for the 2019 season. And that seems like something that needs to happen, especially in light of the fact, and this actually leads into my next conversation as I scroll and check my tweet deck. It doesn't appear that MLS has announced anything with regard to the schedule yet. If anybody's in the chat and wants to point that out to me or confirm or deny, like I said, I'm kind of keeping my eyes on both things. But it doesn't appear that the schedule has been released yet. And so without a schedule, it's difficult for people to make plans to maybe buy tickets to away games, stuff like that. And so I know that we're just going to get the home games today. But the main thing about that is obviously that the crew would need to be included necessarily in the home game opener announcement. I mean, I've mixed up those words. Home opener announcement for all the teams. And I've got a confirmation that they're still not able to buy tickets, which, again, at this point seems, I don't know what that is about. That has to be about some sort of legal concerns that MLS may have with respect to how they're dealing with the sale here. Because remember, this isn't your normal sale because MLS is a single entity. What's happening is that that ownership groups are actually buying into MLS as an entity, and then they're getting operational rights to operate MLS teams in particular cities/markets. So it's not just, hey, I want to buy that team over there or that building over there. You're basically buying the entire building, but you're being allowed to operate one little office space in that building. And what's happening is, and sorry, I got a little sniffles. What's essentially happening is that Precourt is going to move offices, basically. He's going to move from the 8th floor to the 6th floor, and he's going to operate his business out of that office, which he owns as 123rd, or soon to be 124th, soon to be 126th, 128th, et cetera, et cetera. But as one portion of that MLS office, that's all he's going to own, and that's what's going to happen. He's going to move. So he's not just purchasing. He's not purchasing a team. He's just moving his interest. And what's happening on the other end, as Dave Greeley mentioned in his interview this afternoon, is that the Haslam Edwards Group is basically purchasing a stake in that building that is MLS, and then they will operate out of one of the office buildings that was heretofore unoccupied, or taking over Precourt's office, which probably is a better metaphor. He is taking over that, and Precourt is just moving down the hallway, essentially, or down a floor or two. Team Columbus assets and map free. That is an excellent question. When this was initially announced, I think the premise was that the new owners were going to assume all assets in Columbus, like the fixed assets, fixtures, which kind of, it's kind of like buying a house. You don't necessarily take out the heater or the deck because those things are affixed to the home, and would be silly to remove them. Now, whether they take the team is not, no, they're not, and they're not taking the intellectual property. They're obviously not taking, I guess MLS owns intellectual property, but they're not taking, Precourt's not taking the name. He's not taking the uniforms. He's not taking any of that stuff. The only things that are really of concern here, to me, would be the infrastructure, in as much as it refers to, employees. And that would be something that obviously certain employees he may want to take down with him to Austin. executives, marketing folks, things like that. Um, that although that may have been more pertinent if he was going to have a team in 2019 for sure. There probably would have been a big a fight about that, or even 2020, because again, we're at 2019 for the sake of argument, which means that he is about a year out from having to play if he were to get a team in 2020. Again, I don't see that happening. Even Precourt in his interviews said he doesn't want to see that happen. So there is, if he's playing in 2021, then there's really no need for him to uproot employees, except to the extent that they want to go if he offers them a lot more money. But other than that, there's really no reason for him to take any of those employees with him down to Austin. He can find plenty of competent people to run his team down there, and part of typically the community benefits agreement, which I have to read through on the that was signed today on the lease agreement, usually has things regarding like hiring local. So it makes sense to just go down there, get local people involved, invested, and then it helps you engage the community down there, as well as marketing and all that kind of stuff. So there's really no reason for him to take anything from the crew down there, except for maybe some executives that that either he really wants or they really want to go. So so I wouldn't expect that to happen, and I expect all of the map free will be an interesting question, because it is being converted into a complex. I'm forgetting the name of that, which is silly because I just wrote about Confluence Village, because that is being converted. One of the things we need to figure out is that going to be a city asset to the extent it wasn't before? Because I believe, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, that the city owned the land, but Precourt /MLS / whatever the LLC is owns the fixture, or the building essentially. So I do not know if that's going to be transferred over to Haslam, or if that's going to be transferred over to the city, and the city's going to assume control. Those are kind of things that I don't think are going to be particular issues, because given the massive transformation that Map Free is going to come into or turn into, state owned the land, and Precourt owned the building. So there's gonna be some massive changes, and that's obviously a story for kind of an epilogue, which is obviously a story I'll be writing once the deal is signed over, because it is a good question. It's it's going to be one of the issues that is going to have to be determined is who's going to own what out of those old assets. My suspicion is that the city will assume that, because of the nature of what it's going to be, which is a massive community asset. And why would MLS want to own that necessarily? They could get the benefit without having to worry about that. And a lease would obviously provide MLS with the protections they need to make sure that they can access the property as they need it. Because there's already property in the sports park that is earmarked for Precourt. I think they based on the maps I saw, they've got a massive training pitch, and then they've got a supplementary or ancillary training pitch. And then the only thing you're talking about, and then there's a bunch of other soccer fields, which will be open to the community. And then you've got Map Free, which will probably be converted into some sort of massive sports community complex where they can maybe play high school football games, concerts, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. And unless Haslam and Edwards are going to want to leverage that to be able to make money renting that out, which is possible, then it probably makes more sense for the city to own it. But we'll see. That's a good question. Like I said, that's kind of for the epilogue of what's going to happen after this is all wrapped up. Hopefully, this week again. For those maybe have joined late, I don't have any inside information on when an agreement is going to be reached, but it seems to me it's got to be by the end of the week. That makes a whole lot of sense. There's not a lot left. There isn't anything really left that the city, the state, or the county can do that wasn't contemplated to be done after the new year, which is after the deadline. And NPSL games, David, hey David, WPSL games, all of those kind of things can be done. So that'll be an interesting question. And again, that's something I will ask about once we get an agreement. I'll probably start digging around now on that particular issue. But I'm not expecting to get any answers until the end of the year. But hopefully we'll get an announcement this week. There's really no reason to hold off on that. So, like I said, got a few people in the chat now. So hey everyone, and thanks for joining. Sounds like you guys can hear me okay. I I borrowed the mic from my other podcast friends because we're off for a couple of weeks. So hopefully the sound reception is good. If it's not, let me know, and I'll make any changes. So so that kind of takes care of the crew thing, at least as far as where we sit right now. Again, waiting for the schedule home openers to drop. We've gotten the Austin. We talked about that. And so they're looking good. I know there's some deadlines coming in the new year, but the agreement has been executed, and I don't really anticipate that there's any particular issues that they're going to have getting that done. So, hey, Jacob. So that takes care of those two pressing issues. There was obviously another big and before I move on, if anyone who is in the chat has any questions, feel free to ask me them and just throw them out there in the chat. Comments, questions, concerns, all that kind of stuff. And I'm happy to answer that stuff. So that kind of takes care of the Columbus / Austin of it all. Lots of announcements there, and expect a couple more hopefully this week. The other big thing that happened over the last couple of days, which doesn't have anything to do with MLS per se, but could in the future, is the Ottawa Fury situation. Today they announced that they are petitioning the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is the world law, I guess, for lack of a better word, in world soccer, to petition them to stop CONCACAF from attempting to stop them from playing in the USL for 2019. This is an absolute mess of a situation. I have been talking with a couple of attorney friends. If you saw my other podcast with Stephen Bank and Neil Morris, we kind of racked our brain trying to figure out what's going on there. And there is it's a whole lot of unsettledness right now, and it's stuff that's really going to have some major impacts, especially on Ottawa, obviously, right now, and on MLS down the line, potentially. For those of you who may not have been following, Ottawa Fury are a former NASL team that moved to USL a couple of years ago. This was in the midst of what was known that the Canadian Soccer Association was attempting to form a Canadian league, a domestic Canadian league, which had not been in existence, and it was obviously why teams like Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver were playing in MLS, and then why some Canadian teams were playing in USL or NASL. We got a notice last week that CONCACAF had, from what I can tell, preemptively decided that they are not going to allow Ottawa to participate in the USL for 2019. Why that's important, and just to explain what's going on there, essentially a USL or any domestic team that wanted to play in another league, that is generally prohibited. There are a number of exceptions to that, obviously. One being that there's no domestic league to play in, which explains why Ottawa and Toronto and Vancouver are playing where they are right now. But obviously with the creation of the Canadian Premier League, which is supposed to go online later in 2019, there is no longer a quote-unquote exceptional circumstance, which would explain why Ottawa needs to play in the USL as opposed to the Canadian Premier League. Now, obviously, there are certain concerns that Ottawa has about this. Number one, they would be moving to an unproven league that hasn't kicked the ball yet. They're not sure about the financial structure, what financial sponsorships, season tickets, pay scale necessarily. Although, if they did homework, I suppose they would have access to that information. But they basically would be being forced to move into a league from a league that is established, that has grown leaps and bounds, and they're being forced, if this were to happen, to move to the Canadian Premier League and hope that the league survives more than 1 or 2 or 5 years. Now, to be fair to the CPL, there's no indication that this is a fly-by-night operation where there's only a couple of shady characters involved who will scoot at the first sign of trouble. But that doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate financial concerns, and it's an interesting not argument, but an interesting thought is what happens if the Fury move over there and the thing falls apart after 6 months or a year or 18 months, and the league collapses, and then where are the Fury left at that point? Are they forced to go back to USL, crawling between their legs, and hope that USL hasn't built out their entire structure, and hope that they would still get the exceptional circumstances at that point? So, it's tough on the Fury for sure to again, I don't know if force is the right word, but that their option at this point, if if CONCACAF doesn't relent, is either to join the CPL and take their chances or fold. And I've had some preliminary conversations with folks. I'm not going to go any further than that, but there, you can tell what those concerns are, and they have expressed those repeatedly to me. Some of them have to do with obviously the financials and the outlook. And then some of them have to do with just the nature of what CONCACAF is doing. One of the problems I think here is, and why they're going to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, is that it's not clear to me that CONCACAF followed their whatever protocols there are to deny Ottawa the ability to go to play in USL. It's unclear what those protocols are per se, because this was always pro forma in the past. Because there was no Canadian league, this was always an issue of, hey, there's no league for us to play in. We'd like to play soccer, and the USL wants us to play, so can we play? At which point, CONCACAF goes, sure, obviously. We're not going to not let you play because you don't have a domestic league to play in. And so, things have changed, but that doesn't necessarily alleviate the financial issues. Whether or not they are of similar investments as to what the USL is, and they very well may be, they're still unproven at this point, and the outlook for the league is unproven at this point. We don't know what the season ticket base for each team is going to be. Ultimately, we don't know what the attendance is going to be like. I presume that they've got a TV deal in place, although I do not know that for sure, so don't quote me on that. If someone knows that, feel free to let me know, and I'll certainly make that note. But there's a bunch of things that they just haven't been outlined or assured for an established team, and that's the key thing here. We're talking about an established team. The new teams that are coming in, they kind of know what they're getting into, and they know how to how to gauge what's going to happen based on their individual markets. And so CPL versus USL, there are obviously a number of differences there. So if the Ottawa Fury decided that, hey, we want to take a year or two to make sure that the league is going to be around, then it's a reasonable argument on its face. However, I don't know if that's a quote unquote defense to not playing in your domestic league. I mean, this is fairly unprecedented, which is why we've been trying, myself along with Professor Bank, to figure out exactly where, if there is any precedent for a decision like that. Prof. Bank has gone back and done a little bit. The things that usually qualify as an exceptional circumstance are not having a domestic league, political strife, grandfather clauses, which don't really apply here because the grandfather clause is not just that you were in another league. It's that the laws, the FIFA laws didn't exist back then, which is why the Welsh, the teams have probably been allowed to skate. Now, whether the financial disparities qualify as a exceptional circumstance, again, we don't know that at this point because, again, we don't really have any precedent to work off of. Usually when I'm researching a law or going over cases, it's relatively easy to say, okay, what's the law on this point? I can apply the new facts to that law and see if it applies. And this kind of in a roundabout way goes back to the Model law. And where we were talking about the Save the Crew stuff. I mean, this stuff wasn't this law. The Model law was never tested, and had never been used before, and there was no similar laws on the books elsewhere. So you're kind of just guessing about what what the applicability of the statute is or the law is. And again, what we're kind of dealing with here is a law that was put back in place some time ago that didn't necessarily contemplate a situation where a new domestic league pops out of nowhere, and you've got an existing team playing elsewhere, and who doesn't want to go, and where you don't know where the financial outlook of the USL is. Let me ask a question, or let me see a question here. So, Canadian Premier League negotiates kit sponsorships as a league like MLS and NBA, right? I believe so. That is correct. I believe there's like a national quote-unquote sponsor. Ottawa has a different sponsorship deal worked out. That's likely, again, I haven't gotten that deep in the weeds, but assuming that's the case, there's obviously a number of issues with trying to get them, shoehorn them into the CPL in 2019. And here's a question for you. Has the CPL indicated that they want them in the league in 2019? They wanted them previously, and then Ottawa decided that they didn't want to go. And here's the other, obviously, point that kind of works off of that. The former head of the CPL, Victor Montagliaghi, and I may have butchered that, he was the former head of the CPL. He has moved over to CONCACAF. He is essentially the one that is spearheading this effort to deny Ottawa Fury from playing in USL. Now, we don't have any direct information or allegations that he's doing this essentially out of spite, or to force their hand and get them to do what he wanted them to do way back when. But obviously, based on the people I've talked to, they are not discounting that as a possibility. So that is something. Now, whether that can be proven is another issue. They probably will not rely on that as an argument, as far as what they're planning to tell the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But that is certainly something that will be taken into account, or at least raised, before this whole thing is over. So again, there's just a lack of information. The problem with the Court of Arbitration for Sport and trying to figure out what's going on with cases that are before them is that almost nobody talks about the cases that are before them that are pending. It's almost impossible to even get information on what's being alleged, what the defenses are, what the legal theories are, legal defenses are, the facts of the case. Like almost nothing I have been able to find out directly about the claim itself. I've gotten, fortunately, I've gotten some background for a story I'm hopefully writing for The Athletic. But right now I've got like half a story. And I'm hoping to fill out the second half of that story in the next couple of days. But Cass, it's just, you cannot find information about pending cases. It's not like going down to the law library and checking the Superior Court docket online and saying, oh, here's a bunch of PDFs, which give me the case history, all the motions that have been argued, all the hearings that have been had, and all the rulings that have been made. Again, coming back to the Columbus Crew Model lawsuit, all of those are available on the Franklin County website with varying degrees of speed. And so you can follow, if you have never followed the Model lawsuit, you could go in right now, go into the website, and start downloading pleadings from the first day the complaint was filed up through the motion to dismiss that was denied last week, I think it was. And you can get, you would be full you would be full speed ahead on the case. You would know everything that was going on. You might be insane or in a coma from reading all that documentation, but you would know exactly what's going on. With a CAS filing, you just do not know. That stuff is not stuff that is released publicly prior to a ruling being made, and it's impossible to get the parties to the action to give you any on the record information. Which I'm not blaming the parties for doing that. As a attorney / reporter, I would love to have that information so I could report on it and analyze it. But they just do not, for either internal reasons or based on rulings of the court, do not have the ability or are not able or willing to share that information. So it's making it somewhat difficult to figure out what exactly are all the points in the case that we need to discuss and report on, and analyze and see kind of what the reasoning is for this. Is it just that CONCACAF is annoyed that Ottawa refused to play in the CPL and thus are putting the screws to them? Is it that that CPL doesn't really have any, or that Ottawa Fury don't really have any good reasons, and they should be in the CPL, because that is how FIFA runs its organization. Article 73 basically says you are to play in your domestic league unless there are exceptional circumstances. What are those exceptional circumstances? Well, that's what we just kind of talked about. That, again, this particular circumstance doesn't appear to have any precedent, and so it's impossible to figure out if Ottawa has a case. Now, I think they have a case on other grounds, more procedural grounds. Number one being that it doesn't appear that CONCACAF went through their procedures to make this denial. And I guess here I'll back up and kind of there's what are the CS procedures. That is one of there would be written briefs. I do not know if there are oral arguments. I know with the FIFA Dispute Resolution Center, which is handling the DeAndre Yedlin case, there are not oral arguments. It is basically submittal of the record, which means that you file all your documents, and then there is a ruling made. So I'll check on that. And I'll check on that for sure. But it's basically, I think it's mostly submittal on the record. In this particular case, what we're going to see is Ottawa file an injunction. I can tell you that much, to prevent CONCACAF from denying them from playing in the USL for next year. It'll probably work the same way that the NASL wanted an injunction for to play, as a league, in then 2017 or 2018, excuse me, and that they're going to have to show an irreparable harm if they're not allowed to play, and they're likely to succeed on the merits of the case. I think the irreparable harm is fairly easy to establish, given that the short timeline under which they would be forced to move over to the CPL. The likelihood of success on the merits, well, that's an interesting situation. The likelihood of success on this narrow issue of CONCACAF's lack of following procedures, or likelihood of success on the merits that they should be allowed to play in the USL when there is a viable, or at least potentially viable, domestic league, because the two are different things. Because if they're arguing that they should be able to play with the USL until they decide they don't want to, or for the rest of their lives, let's say they never want to leave the USL, and they love it there and they want to play there, until USL is no longer in existence. Well, then they're challenging essentially Article 73 and the domestic requirements in FIFA, and it seems unlikely that they would prevail on that unless one of the exceptional circumstances has to do with some of the financials, where the league is of such inferior financial and sporting quality that it would likely result in the team folding, because they are not a viable or ongoing concern in that league under these circumstances. And so that's probably going to require some financials from the CPL to kind of give the Court of Arbitration for Sport some background on it. How much are we paying our players? How many players are we signing? What is our sponsorship revenue? What's our TV revenue? And things like that. Now, I would say probably that the difference between the CPL and the USL is not as vast as the difference between the USL and MLS, or MLS and pick your league, Liga MX, or the Italian league, Serie A. So the differences aren't that vast, but I can't answer that question without knowing a little bit more about the CPL's financial outlook and what they're planning to do with their league as far as that's concerned. So that is a question. And again, we're not even sure that is particularly relevant because the Article 73, the exceptional circumstance exception, doesn't say anything about financial issues. Again, it has to do mostly with there is no domestic league for you to play in, so you literally can't play unless you join another league. Or if there's some political issues where it's dangerous, literally, your life is at stake when you play, or it's just generally dangerous for you to be playing there, or something along those lines. So it's just difficult to say at this point what an exceptional circumstance means beyond the couple of examples that we've been able to kind of discern based on my discussions with Prof Bank. And so who the hell knows? So I'm hoping to get some of that information tomorrow. Fingers crossed. I have some potential leads on that front that hopefully I will be able to explore, because it's a fascinating issue, and it's probably an issue that deserves or needs some clarity. Not that there's going to be leagues popping up here all over the place that will take away teams from other leagues, but this is it's a unique issue in this context. So that's kind of where we sit on the Ottawa Fury, and then we'll just have to see where things go from here. Like I said, I may be back here with an update in the next couple of days if my research and interviews bear fruit, which I hope they do. So so I've got a few more minutes because I'm going to the gym. As you can tell, I'm kind of in my workout clothing today. And so if you have any questions, I'll hang around here for a couple of more minutes. The other things that are going on, MLS is supposed to release their schedule. I have not seen it done as of yet, which is weird because it is 5:30 Pacific time, which is clearly later than MLS on the East Coast when they would typically release this stuff. But definitely teams have been teasing this all day. So let me just pull up MLS soccer, because like I said, I was on the tweet deck, and sometimes that doesn't upload everything that MLS is doing. So let's see. Now the last reports were just your basic news stories. So the schedule has not been released, and like I said, the main thing we're looking for on that is whether Columbus is there. I assume they're going to be there. I don't have any reason to believe they're not going to be there. So we'll see how that goes. And then hold on, let me pull up a message real quick, make sure. All right, so nothing. Will Columbus also release its schedule? So again, all we're getting today is, I guess I should clarify. The only thing we're getting today is the home openers. But again, the main thing we want there is that Columbus is listed, because that means they're playing next year. So that's the only thing we're looking for there, to confirm that they're going to be playing next year, and we all think they are at this point. So it's again, this is one of those worst kept secrets that is MLS is quite famous for. So we'll see if we can get that done, and then we can kind of Columbus fans can start celebrating in earnest, and for MLS's purposes, start buying tickets to games and start buying merchandise and all of the things that they have pledged to do once Precourt was out of the way. So again, this seems to be all but over but the shouting, but we'll see what's going on there. Beyond that, Not a whole lot else going on. Obviously, today was a pretty big news day for all of that stuff. On the Sounders front, as some of you know, I do cover the Sounders. Have season tickets. You can probably see over my shoulder uh, the 2006 MLS championship banner. Um, a couple of things on that front. Uh, Christian Roldan was signed to a new deal. Nico Moreno, if you don't follow him on Twitter, you should absolutely find him. I don't have his Twitter handle memorized, but find Nico Moreno, follow him. He covers all the Sounder stuff. Roldan's got a 5-year guaranteed deal, it appears, at about $800,000 per, which appears to me to be about what his worth is to the Sounders. I know there was some question about whether that was too rich, given that his options overseas aren't particularly high. Number one, we don't know that. Number two, we should be encouraging MLS to pay its domestic players, especially those who are quality domestic players. And I don't think anybody believes that Christian Roldan isn't a quality domestic player. And number three, he's only 23 years old, which means by the time his contract's up, he'll just be in his peak years. And so at that point, they may sell him in 3 years if he's just tearing it up. And he's a fantastic player. I've obviously covered him at practice. He's a super nice guy, so absolutely well deserved. And we knew this was coming. I talked to some sources in the last couple of weeks, and they said that things were progressing well, and so this isn't surprising. I don't think we'll get an announcement until the beginning of the year, just because that's what I was told. Maybe the fact that Nico was able to get the scoop accelerates their timeline, but I wouldn't expect that to be the case. So, and then obviously related to that was the Jordan Morris deal, which got a lot more scrutiny. I think for reasons which, I mean, I understand why people were concerned about the deal. Him coming basically off 2 injury-riddled years, starting off with a fantastic year up front, obviously, but then had a second year where he wasn't nearly as good because he was injured and played through injury and probably should have not. But number one, he played through injury, and then in 2018, obviously had the ACL surgery and was just out. So he's basically had 1 year, and he got a big deal. And so the things that people I don't think have taken into account is, number one, he probably, maybe not right now, but soon, was going to have some options to go overseas as he did initially. Remember, he almost signed with Werder Bremen before he signed for the Sounders. Now, obviously, his value isn't particularly high at this point, coming off an injury-plagued couple of years. But the other thing is that even if his value wasn't particularly high, his contract is coming up at the end of the year, at the end of 2019. So they basically were faced with a choice whether they should sign him now and keep him locked up or risk losing him for nothing. And they obviously took the choice that they're going to sign him now. And so they gave him a good contract. It certainly is a very rich contract, rich by MLS standards, I suppose. But the thing is, his contract is basically 3 years with 2 option years. And the first 2 years, again, I've talked to sources, the first 2 years are quote unquote cap friendly. I wasn't given a number, but you can interpret cap friendly to mean under a designated player threshold, and maybe substantially so. He made about $230,000 last year. He's probably going to be around $250,000 or $260,000 with your standard raises. So he might be around $400,000 this year. And then the second year, maybe he's around $600,000, and then you get the real escalator in year 3, which is going to be guaranteed. So maybe that one goes up to $1 million. And then the last 2 years, which are option years, maybe those were like $2 million a piece or 1.7 or something along those lines. Again, I'm just spitballing. I do not have the numbers whatsoever. I just know that the first 2 years are cap friendly, which means that there isn't a real problem as far as the Sounders being able to negotiate their cap. And frankly, one of the obviously issues when these contracts get signed is there going to be discord in the locker room? If he's making $400,000, yeah, that's pretty rich, but you've got Raul Ruidiaz, who's around 2 point something, above $2 million, and so he's not going to be upset about Jordan making $400,000 or $500,000. And then your other forwards, besides Morris, is Will Bruin at this point, who has been a very good player for the Sounders, especially at this price point. But it's not like he's underpaid. He's making around $300,000. I think he might be around $350 now. So is that really egregious in the context of Morris, who is someone who is younger, has some more dynamic skill sets, and probably has international options, especially coming up on a free contract? So why would Bruin necessarily be upset about that? At least at this point. Obviously, at some point in the future, maybe next year, if Morris is coming off another horrible year where he only scores 3 goals and Bruin's up there, banging in like 9 or 10. Okay, yeah, maybe there's a problem at that point, but at this point, I really don't see an issue. And then the important thing is obviously the last 2 years are option years that the Sounders control. So the odds of the Sounders being locked into a horrible deal with Morris are pretty low, because either he will be sold because there's interest overseas and the Sounders and Morris decide that it's in his interest to go. Either they pick up his options, which means they believe he has performed to the level of those deals. If he's signing a massive contract where he's going to be a DP making like $1.8 million a year or something like that, then it means he's probably scored like 18 goals or so over the last several years per year. Or they will simply not pick up his contract options unless they're morons, like a couple of teams who have accidentally triggered options, then there's not going to be a problem. So I wouldn't even worry about that either. So either he gets sold because they want to sell him, either he's performing up to the level of his contract, or they don't pick up the options. Those are the options, unless they're idiots and do something to accidentally trigger an option. So I wouldn't worry about it. Everyone should calm down and relax. And the other point, again, that was raised, that is that we should be encouraging MLS to pay their domestic players instead of going overseas to find players who don't really add all that much more than what the U.S. players are providing. So. Okay, so I think that is it for now. I know there was a couple of other issues that I know people wanted me to talk about, but we've got some time before the season starts up again and before things continue to happen. So I'm going to sign off for now, and then we'll chat next soon. See you later.